What's up, everybody? Michael Walsh here. So, I want to talk about Islam Makhachev's performance last Saturday and why I would argue it was not boring. And at the same time, I would argue that the fight itself was pretty boring, but Islam is not to blame for that, and I don't think he was being boring. Now, those of you who have been watching my channel for a little bit might be surprised to hear this because I caught plenty of flack a little while ago for calling out Khamzat Chimaev for putting on a very boring performance against Dricus du Plessis. And by any kind of like objective metric, his fight against Dricus was more exciting than Islam's fight against JDM. You know, Khamzat got to more dominant positions more frequently. He landed far more total strikes than did Islam. Both fights went the distance. Both fights were clear, 5-0 for the winner. So why the double standard? Why am I criticizing Khamzat and being charitable towards Islam, when if anything, you'd maybe think it should be the reverse? So there's a few reasons. One of the more, superficial reasons was the hype, the anticipation. Khamzat is one of the most exciting fighters on the roster. So is Dricus. That fight promised to be exciting. I had people over to watch that fight. I hyped up the fight to them. I assured them there was almost no way it could be boring. And lo and behold, it was fucking boring. So there's kind of the hype, the anticipation, the expectation, and then being let down by the result. So there's that. But the more important reason, and the more fair reason, is that I would argue that Khamzat could have done more, that Khamzat could have sought the finish, could have probably gotten the finish, whereas I don't believe Islam could have. So, as someone who trains, as someone who does grappling, as someone who has competed, by my eye, I think Islam was kind of doing everything he could. I think it was all he could do to keep JDM where he was keeping him. And it was clear that he wanted to pass to more dominant positions. At points he did, at points he got to the back, he got the body triangle. Like, he wanted better positions, and he wanted the submission. Like, he went for the Darce many times. He got really close one time. Like, that towards the end of the fight, there was one attempt that was very, like it wasn't actually on and close in that sense, where it's like he's actually choking him and you're like wondering if JDM's going to tap. But the entry was very close, and I think we all could tell, like, if Islam can actually get it locked on, it's a done deal. So in that sense, it was very close. He was even going for that straight arm lock towards the end of the fight because he clearly wanted a submission and it just like wasn't happening. And I think a lot of this just comes down to the fact that JDM is like a better grappler than Dricus. Like, JDM was doing more stuff off his back. He was doing more stuff to try to initiate scrambles, and Islam was shutting it down. But his best ability to do that was just to like keep him locked down in half guard, and JDM wasn't letting him pass, and it kind of got stuck there. Whereas with Dricus, Dricus just looked like he didn't know what he was doing. He was like holding Khamzat on top of him, and Khamzat was much more like effortlessly able to get to dominant positions and land pitter-patter ground and pound. And I got the impression, and I feel like I have an educated eye here, I got the impression that Khamzat was coasting. That he just knew, like, yeah, I can just do this all 5 rounds. Why risk anything? Why risk getting tired? I can just coast to a win. This is easy. Like, this is, I don't even have to get out of second gear. Whereas I think with Islam, while it was a dominant win, and while he like very, very obviously win, I still think he had to try very hard to get that result. And I think he was trying to get an even better result. I think he was trying to, again, to get to more dominant positions. He occasionally got them. He was trying to get submissions. He got close once. But JDM, to his credit, had enough defense and enough just clear, enough fight in him that if Islam got lazy, that he would have, initiated a scramble. He would have tried to get to his feet. In some of the rounds, towards the end of the round, he actually did get back to his feet. Like, I think Islam was doing his best to get that fight finished. And the result wasn't very fun. Like, the fight itself was still boring, and in terms of like pure action, it was still kind of more boring than Dricus and Khamzat. Now, as a viewer, I was more excited, both because it's a bigger fight with like bigger legacies on the line, but I still felt like anticipation the whole time. I still knew a finish could happen, and I was still kind of wondering if, JDM could do something to maybe turn the tide a little. Whereas when I watched the Khamzat Dricus fight, it felt pretty much from midway through round 2 onward, it just felt like a done deal. It just felt like we knew it was going to happen. Yeah, Dricus actually got on top in round 5, and there was this brief fleeting moment of like, holy shit, is he just going to plot armor his way to a victory here? Of course he didn't. And I don't know. So that's where, again, I would say the fight was boring. And it's, it's one of Islam's most boring fights in the UFC. He's not as exciting on average as Khamzat is. Because, again, that was part of the anticipation, is that prior to his title win over Dricus, Khamzat was one of the most exciting fighters on the roster. Whereas Islam wasn't that exciting on his way to the title. He wasn't finishing guys that often. His fights weren't as dominant as they became. He actually kind of grew into his level of competition. Once he started fighting more named people like Bobby Green and Dan Hooker, that's where he starts finishing them. And then he, of course, he finishes Oliveira, he finishes Volk in the rematch, finishes Dustin and Moicano. Like, he became more exciting as a champion. But even there, he's not the most exciting guy in the roster. It's not like he turned into Alex Pereira or something. He just, became more watchable than a lay and pray grappler. And to many people, his fight against JDM on Saturday felt like a lay and pray kind of performance. But I'm here to tell you, I could tell watching that he was trying to do more. Again, he was trying to get better positions. He was trying to go for submissions. And JDM was good enough to stop that from happening. He wasn't good enough to escape reliably. He wasn't good enough to stop the takedowns reliably. He wasn't good enough to do meaningful damage during his brief opportunities on the feet. But he was good enough to defend the Darce choke entries and to keep it in half guard and not get past. So, that is what it is. And I wouldn't criticize Islam for it. I wouldn't be worried that his next fight's going to suck too or something like that. Whereas even with Chimaev, I'm not too worried that he's just going to be permanently boring. But I'm actually more worried that he'll do a similar thing to whoever his next opponent is. That he'll just be like, yeah, I've got exclusively 5-round fights now. I'm the champion. I'm the A side. If they can't stop me from just doing that again, I'm just going to do that again and coast. I'm not going to make a point to nuke them in the first round the way I have historically in my career. But we'll see. We'll see with all of it. But that's I wanted to chime in on that because there's been a lot of discussion in the community about how boring this is or isn't. And yes, it harkens back to the Dricus Khamzat fight. And as someone who, was seen as just being a mega hater for dogging on Khamzat and had to deal with all of the complaints of no, the onus is on Dricus to escape. Khamzat doesn't have to do anything more than that. As someone who firmly argued that Khamzat was boring, I'm here to say, this wasn't Islam's fault. So that's all I got.